Should I just take it up, Ronnie, or did you want to say anything?
Good. It's all you, David.
Okay, all right. So the second part of the session, I'm really excited about it because I feel like we've had some excellent panels today, including the one we just had, which have featured a lot of leaders and a lot of innovative things that are going on, but they've mostly been about the association level, the DMO level within the industry. So we're going to take it to another level, maybe where the rubber meets the road level, and talk about tour operators, the people actually creating the product on the ground, operating the product, and what DEI means for their businesses, for the tour operator industry, what people are doing in that industry around DEI. So I'm excited for that. We have two panelists that'll be joining me today. The first is Stephanie Jones, who you just heard from, Blacks in Travel and Tourism, and Mitch Bach, who is with TripSchool. We're going to be talking to them both about the things they're doing. They're both, I think I can comfortably say they're both leading the industry in this regard. So I'm excited to give them an opportunity to share what they're doing with their respective organizations. I will first kick off by giving a short introduction of myself. So I am the owner or owner of North America Tour Hub. We are a tour operator based in the US. We do day tours and are now expanding into multi-day tours across the country. Started in New York, but now we're in 10 cities nationwide and growing. And, you know, we were, I would count us amongst the organizations that have been struggling to be staffed, period, and also struggling to diversify that staff, though that has been important to us for some time. So we're continuing to work on that, and that's why I'm heavily involved with Travel Unity and involved in other initiatives as well, because we feel this is important. One of the things that we believe at our company, and I think this will be echoed by the other two panelists, is that one of the most important questions that the industry has to ask itself is, it's not just about telling the stories of marginalized people, it is a question about who tells those stories. And I think that is something that is important to us, and it's guiding our work on this. And I think the industry itself has to face that, because I think someone mentioned, Karen, I think mentioned earlier, you know, I've seen a lot of operators and products out there that are speaking on behalf of these communities. So you see a lot of white tour guides speaking on behalf of Black communities, speaking on behalf of Native communities, and so on and so forth. And I've never, in my 12 years of being a tour operator, I never wanted to speak for a group I wasn't a part of. So I always found that weird and uncomfortable. But so it's not something we're prepared to do. But I do think that that's an important question for us to kick around here in our discussions. And I think the second big area I hope to cover is, you know, we've heard from all the DMOs, we've heard from the associations. You know, I'd like to hear from Stephanie and from Mitch what they think those organizations can be doing to help tour operators grow, to bring tour operators who are paying attention to these issues to the forefront, and so on and so forth. So with that, I'm just going to let Stephanie and Mitch introduce themselves. Stephanie, would you like to go first?
Sure. Thank you, David. And thank you, Ronnie, for inviting me to be a part of this discussion, which is very near and dear to my heart. I am the founder and CEO for the Cultural Heritage Economic Alliance, which powers the National Blacks in Travel and Tourism Collaborative. BTT for short, works to advance Blacks in travel and tourism and to level the playing field for these micro-local Black businesses to actively participate and profit in their local tourism ecosystems. I also wear the hat of a tour operator. I've been operating Black cultural heritage tour itineraries in South Florida for the past 5 years now. And so I work, I'm going to be speaking on behalf of myself as a Black owned tour operator. And then I'm also going to be speaking on behalf of many Black tour operators that we represent and that are partners with us on the Black cultural heritage tour itineraries that we have began building out throughout the United States. So basically, we're replicating the tour product model that we've been operating in South Florida, and we're now replicating this throughout the state of Florida, Georgia, North Carolina, and South Carolina. And we have, over the summer, curated several multi-day Black cultural heritage tour itineraries covering the Southeast region of the US. We will be on the ground with our teams next year, traveling throughout the US to build out more multi-day Black cultural heritage tour itineraries, which are designed to help level the playing field and drive more consistent tourist foot traffic and dollars into Black businesses and underserved communities, because that's the way we're going to create real equity in this industry. Because it's great to be diverse and inclusive, but if Black businesses aren't making money, then what's the purpose of saying we're diverse and inclusive? And so a lot of the work that we do, again, centers around how do we advance, create equitable opportunities for Black people in this industry to make money, because even before the pandemic, most small Black-owned tour operators weren't operating full time because they have not had the consistent foot traffic, visitors, and driving consistent revenue to their businesses. And then some of them are no longer in existence because of the pandemic. So through these multi-day Black cultural heritage tour itineraries, we are working with them to make certain that we're able to drive consistent revenue to them. Now, it's not my intention to offend anyone, but I just have to be very honest, because as I'm meeting with folks, and I've had very transparent conversations with Catherine from NTA and Carol Ann from CHEA and many others who represent tour operators, many who now see that Black is the new green because of the Black Lives Matter movement and the George Floyd murder. There is a heightened awareness about the Black experience and Black culture in the US. And so my question to a lot of operators, why now? And the other part too is, it's not equitable if you're just looking to find a Black tour guide to be the voice in face of the tour if they're only getting crumbs from the table. So I think this is a really unique opportunity for all tour operators who have been operating the civil rights movement tours. And to your point, David, you say, why do white tour operators feel that they can tell the stories of Black people? Well, because the industry has given them the permission to do so. For years, the National Park Service, they have built out content and itineraries that amplify the civil rights movement, which is a very important part of our history. So you have always had, white tour operators, large and small, telling those stories. And I'll give you an example. I was just in Charleston, and we met with some Black tour operators because we're looking for partners for our itineraries. But the CVB also set up a tour with Bulldog, which is a white operator who's telling the Black experience story in Charleston. I'm not saying it's wrong, but It bothers me when there's no representation. If you're going to tell the story, then at least have someone that represents that community telling their own story. But again, that does not really represent equity. And I'm really in sync with what Karen just said. Instead of just using tour guides to be the face and to tell the Black story, we do need more Black tour operators to own their stories in our history. And again, so that there's equitable opportunities for everybody to make money. Because on the flip side of this industry is not made for small businesses to prosper. And when I'm saying small, I'm talking about micro small businesses, because if you own a business on this call, you probably say, well, I'm a small business. But we know that Black businesses don't always have access to the opportunities to grow their business. Point in case, we just participated in IPW last month. Now, it costs $4,000 just to have a 10 by 10 booth, and that doesn't include registration, the lights, the carpet, and everything else. Okay, so how many micro local independent tour operators can afford to be at IPW, which is where they need to be so that they can meet with international tour operators who want to sell their products to inbound travelers? So the industry has been very much built to exclude equity for smaller businesses who cannot access or participate in play, to be able to reach people that are going to drive business to them. So that's why we have created these itineraries and partnered with not only small tour operators, restaurants, B&Bs, transportation operators, so that through these itineraries, they can now start to receive consistent revenue and consistent foot traffic into their businesses. That's equitable opportunities for businesses. That's people who own the stories, telling the stories, and making money for the stories, not just being hired to be the face and then getting $12 an hour, $15, I don't know what a tour guide makes, okay? But the point that I'm trying to make is, if we're talking about DEI, then equity, it should be EDI, because equity has to be the priority in order for DEI to be sustainable for everybody in this industry.
We need a round of applause, I think. Extremely well said.
Sorry, sorry, Dave. I
well.
want to interrupt very, very briefly. So sorry, David. But Stephanie, I just want to say, I was over here clapping and snapping my fingers. I thank you. I'm so glad you brought this discussion up. I'm so happy you brought it up. It means so much to me, because the budget thing about IPW, I was actually there as well. It's cost so much money, and the price does exclude minority, people of color who may not have that income. So thank you. I just want to say thank you for that. I was over here on my side clapping and everything.
Thank you, Ron. Thank you, Romy.
Great. Mitch, you want to go ahead?
I yield my time to Miss Stephanie M. Jones. No, Stephanie, David, great to see you. Great to see everybody here, everybody from the first half of this as well. I think this is a really important conversation to have, but more importantly, I am absolutely happy to hear that this isn't just a conversation, but a chance to talk about action that is taking place. There's been a lot of conversation, and put an emoji in the box if you are sick of Zoom and sick of conferences, because I think we're all ready to step into what's next. And I have to say, on my end, I'm slightly afraid that we're missing a window of opportunity to enact actual change in our industry, because as we, Stephanie asked before, where have you been before, to conferences, to CBBs, to tour operators, to everybody else? Well, the going was good, and so nobody did a whole lot of soul searching or a whole lot of thinking about things. And as the industry ramps up again, I'm getting ahead of myself, but I'm excited to talk about some actual actions that are taking place. I run, similar to Joan in the last session, a training organization called TripSchool. We work with early stage businesses, small tour operators principally, and tour guides and tour directors, but really see them as the face of travel, but also the engine of the long tail of the kind of tour and experiences economy. And I think they're often the people that leave the most indelible mark on a travel experience. And so I grew up as a tour guide. I left graduate school to start my own tour business over in France. And I did everything wrong according to the French, but I learned sort of what my passion was, which was absolutely centered around passionate storytelling, telling the story of everybody, but also developing the kinds of tour experiences that are beyond what you think you're supposed to be doing when you're in Paris or New York or Washington, DC or anywhere else. And I think there is a level in which that kind of spirit connects with economic injustice and racial injustice, and the ways in which sometimes a lot of money and a lot of attention ends up getting focused on a very few sites or very few restaurants or very few stops or neighborhoods in destinations. And so my organization, TripSchool, we've tried to create, I guess, a new group of people that are looking to create travel experiences and then lead them sort of beyond that sort of standard route. And on that front, over the pandemic last year, we started a project called the Diversity Project, because as I see it, there's an existing and then there's a future problem. The future problem is to correct the economic inequities that Stephanie just spoke to. There's an existing problem of what do you do with the tour operators that currently have an enormous staff of homogenous people creating homogenous itineraries that are bland or average, or aren't going outside of the box of what you could be doing. And there's implications for who's earning, there's implications for storytelling. And what I've tried to do on those two fronts is last year, Leon Burnett, who runs kind of this project as part of our organization, we hosted 40 sessions on storytelling, but telling the stories of everybody but the normal things that you find in a farmer's guidebook. This year, I've been really excited to launch or be part of a project called the Pathways Project, the tourism. You can see it at tourismpathways.com. TripSchool is a training organization. We've partnered with USTOA, with a tour operator conference called Arrival, with Destination America and the Treadwright Foundation, EF Explore America or EF Tours, the student travel organization, and then also a few other nonprofits to create essentially an entire pipeline of awareness campaigns. We partnered with a marketing agency to go out, run Facebook ads, run awareness campaigns that are trying to just simply reach people in a new way to be aware of the industry, specifically of tour guides, tour directors, and tour operators. Because I think it speaks to where today's youth, it makes me feel old to even say that, are at in terms of what they see as their future job prospects. We're living in a creator economy, certainly a gig economy, but people who are interested in owning their own businesses, developing their own travel products. It's never been easier with the kinds of tools that exist today. But at the same time, this industry, and again, I'm speaking very specifically about kind of group travel or tour operators and tour guides, we've suffered from sort of a soft bigotry of word of mouth for the last 50 years. You tell your friends, and your friends are largely similar to you, and it's hard to learn about a job that never shows up on a career quiz. And so to me, that awareness campaign of bringing this job or this kind of career path to a wider audience requires a lot of heavy lifting. It requires marketing dollars. It requires a lot of effort that then needs to be followed up not only with training and mentorship, and that's kind of where TripSchool comes in terms of this Pathways project, but then, as Stephanie said, conference attendance. So we partnered with this organization called Arrival to provide 10 free spots to Black entrepreneurs who are creating tour businesses that would not otherwise be able to attend this conference, which is 1,200 tour operators meeting in San Diego in February. And TripSchool, we're developing our first class, thanks to Destination America and EF Tours, our first class of a tour director training program, which is happening down in Atlanta. We're essentially doing a modified version of sort of a Southern tour, everything from music to civil rights, trail heritage, and training them along the way. And we're training a class of 25 people while also getting commitments of a wide range of group tour operators to be meeting them, to be hiring them, and a big thanks to Destination America, or the Travel Corporation, and EF for putting their money where their mouth is and saying, we believe in this, not because we have an internal committee talking about this all day long, but we want to see real people be trained to enter this industry and start to change the pathway that people come into this industry through. And we called it pathways, and I'll end with this. We called it pathways because I know CEOs of major corporations that started out as a tour guide. It's a legitimate and valid and viable way, maybe not to spend the next 60 years of your life, but maybe to spend 5 years and then move into itinerary development or operations or any of these internal roles, or working at a CVB or anything else that you come into contact with in this industry, starting through that first job as an experienced provider. And I think, you know, Stephanie talks about an ecosystem, and it is an ecosystem. Internally, product designers need to change, and large group tour operators, people who are hiring, all of this needs to change. And hopefully this is a pipeline or a pathway to generate this internal change and this external change, different than the traditional route, which is, oh, I want to work in travel. I go to hospitality school and I get funneled specifically into hotels or some of the more traditional routes.
Yeah, just keying off of that, tours and activities is definitely the unheralded part of the travel industry, certainly. And it is made up of a lot of mom and pop companies, you know, people that are independent tour guides or very small operators, you know. So, and to the point both Stephanie and Mitch made, it's very hard for a small operator to engage with the broader industry, to go to trade shows, to advertise, to you know, even to join their local CVB is sometimes a hurdle. So, you know, there are these obstacles that are structural within the industry, within the travel industry. This isn't really a tours and activities problem, but it's a travel industry problem. We talked a little bit, both Mitch and Stephanie, you both mentioned things. I guess the question I'm wondering is, what can tour operators be doing now to both change the industry and change themselves when it comes to DEI?
Well, one, instead of always thinking you have to reinvent the wheel, think about collaboration.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of only looking at finding a Black tour guide to be the voice or the face of your Black history tour, collaborate with existing Black tour operators who have been doing this for years. Bring them a business and let them do what they do. And then you both win, you both make money. But I grow weary of having conversations. And to your point, when I was at IPW and we met with over 50 international tour operators from all over the world, and some of the very large operators, one that Mitch mentioned, scheduled to meet with us. And when she sat down, the first question she had, well, how do we find Black tour guides? And I'm like, well, if that's the conversation you want to have with us, then that's not the conversation we're having. Because if you're just looking for Black tour guides or Black people to train so that white tour operators, and it's not a racist thing, it's just a reality thing, can hire them to be the face and the voice of their tours when they're only going to be paid an hourly wage, then that's not equitable, that's not equity. And I actually had a very long conversation with DEI and explained to them, you know, our perspective about equity. And again, it shouldn't be tour operators' priority again, just because they want to offer this tour product now, again, because they see the dollars and the interests that are associated with offering a Black History tour experience. It shouldn't just be, well, let's just, and as a Black tour operator, I struggle with this attitude of, well, we're going to help you by hiring you to tell your story, but we're only going to pay you, pennies to do it. And so there's also this savior complex that I have experienced from other operators who feel like they're doing me a favor by coming into my Black communities and, hiring me to be the voice in the face. So if we really are talking about DEI and sustainable DEI, then every operator, especially, and I use this, example as well, for all of our indigenous communities and tribes in the US, how often do you have tour operators going on to tribal lands telling their stories? But it's so quick and easy for operators to feel like they can package and tell our story. And then if they can't tell it, then they'll find a Black person to train them as a tour guide for their company to tell the story. So collaboration, don't reinvent the wheel. Partner with existing operators, partner with us on our itineraries. We already created the product, sell it, and we both make money. Because authenticity is also important, as you stated, David. It does matter who's telling the story. And tourists and travelers, they're not food, if you're talking about Black history, and there's something that other operators can't do that Black tour operators can do. And that's intertwine their own personal history and story in their storytelling, or intertwine their ancestors and relatives who were actually a part of the civil rights movement, who are actually, part of building, and influencing certain communities in the US. It's just a different type of storytelling and a different type of level of authenticity that comes when, a Black tour operator is doing a tour and telling the story. So I say collaboration, instead of feeling that you need to come into a community, a Black community, and reinvent the wheel or build products. Work with existing tour operators, help build their business, because then it becomes a win-win for everybody.
Just to follow up on that, it's funny because what this dovetails with is a larger systemic problem with the industry in general, which is underpaid tour guides and underpaid tour directors. That I was one for 20 years. I still do tours, and most of the time the tour guide or the tour leader or the tour director, the multi-day leader and organizer of the trip, they discover this job later in their life. You don't need the money in the same way, or you have savings, and therefore it's okay if you're paid $200 a day for what's a 15-hour workday or 13-hour workday, because it's all right. I do this to get out of the house, or I'm doing this for a little change of pace. And there's it's funny because sometimes I get people who say, am I going to be, too old to do this job? I go, no. I mean, if anything, you're kind of the target demographic, and it's largely because you can only do this job, whether you're white or Black or Native American or anything, for that long. If it's gig economy work where you're making, sometimes $15 an hour plus tips or whatever. And part of that, to me, speaks to a need or a transformation that the economy is sort of seeing more overall, which is that you need to be empowered or understand and learn or just know that there are these tools and opportunities out there for empowering yourself to be that earner. In other words, a way to directly find your own clients, a way to create your own tours and sell your own tours, and use some of these tools that didn't exist even 5 years ago to be the moneymaker, or to be the person who can scale their income and not always just this hourly wage earner. And that's a problem that I think is generally the way things are set up right now in the tours and attractions industry. And it's only going to pinch, from my experience, it's only going to pinch the guide more as OTAs and operators and everybody in the sort of sales chain are penny pinching or trying to save where they can save. And so there's a general equity problem that I think needs to be talked about or solved in our industry with that bottom level of worker who is often that entry level position to be transformed, or for them to understand the power that they do have or can have.
I think there is an important point there, and it sort of leads into another question that I have for you guys. Is this is a low margin business? It is like a crazy low margin business. You know, I'm like Mitch. I got into tours 14 years ago now, and I did it because I read history textbooks for fun, and I like showing people around. It was a fun activity. Tour guides don't get into tours to become rich, or they're delusional. But you know, it is an issue because the low margins interferes with people making a living wage. And so then you have the problem where in order to be a tour guide, as Mitch is saying, you have to have like historical resources. You already like made money. You have to come from a family with money. You have to, you know, not have to depend on your tour guiding income to pay the bills, as is often the case. And for people from marginalized communities, Black communities, Latino communities, Native American communities, often do not have these resources. So, you know, how do they get started? And then the second thing, sort of going off what Stephanie was talking about partnering, you know, I can tell you as a guy that's negotiated with a lot of multi-day tour operators around the world, I mean, they twist my arm behind my back trying to pull every last dollar they can out of that operation, and there's almost nothing left for anyone. And you know, with those kinds of tight margins, I honestly think it's tough. It's tough to develop the kinds of partnerships, Stephanie, that you're talking about, that where both parties are actually doing well. And you know, who's responsible for that? And that's kind of a dilemma that I have. You know, these are the prices the market is willing to pay, you know, who is communicating these things. So sort of going into my next question. And my next question is, you know, we're tour operators, we're a small part of the industry, we have our own struggles in trying to do this differently and trying to do it better with not reinventing the wheel, being partnerships, bringing more people in as tour guides and encouraging more people to take on this work. Whose help do we need as a sector? You know, whose involvement could help make things easier for us and empower us to make more changes and to make changes faster?
Well, I mean, there are a lot of trade associations, you know, specific to tour operators, such as Arrival and ISTOA? I think that's wrong. But what are these organizations doing, you know, to support tour operators from an educational standpoint, but also from, you know, how do you, you know, gain revenues to be able to support your operations? You know, so I think if you're a member of these associations, then there should be some accountability, you know, for them, you know, to help better position you all. But I think also tour operators have to look at other streams of revenue other than inbound travelers. Corporations, you know, who are looking for team building activities, who are looking for activities, that will allow them to learn about their local communities or just learn about different cultures in their communities. So, and we already know students. So there are different markets that as tour operators, we should be tapping, because I think sometimes we're only focusing on, inbound travelers, domestic and international visitors, which is, I'm certain, a big part of the business, but there's a lot of untapped markets that could benefit from the products that we have to provide if we know how to market them and make it, present it as a opportunity or a resource, educational or diversity training resource for corporations. So I think, we have to hold the associations more accountable for being more creative in doing things to bring additional resources to their members to be able to sustain their businesses. But also the operator themselves really need to think outside of the box and look at markets, that they haven't targeted that they may be able to sell and market their products to.
Yeah, David, I think the landscape is changing, and I think it's a matter of education and awareness to understand how drastically this is changing. You're right. I frankly think when you talk about the razor thin margins, you're essentially talking about day tours, and day tours do have slim margins, and often scaling or growing and earning requires volume. It's just numbers. But there's other avenues, like Stephanie said, that are better, that have better sort of, pricing models. Multi-day tours, for example, have massive margins built into it. It's not something somebody wakes up and has an idea of as a path in their life. Like, I still don't even know what I do, and I've done it for 20 years. So the idea that somebody can wake up and think, oh, I'm going to put together operationally, Black-owned restaurants and a Black-owned motor coach company and local hotels and support local economies, be sustainable, and actually make $600 a head is not something that anybody knows about. Very few people know about it. We run a workshop called Start a Tour Business. It is what it sounds like. And all it is running people through some of these different models. And I have to say, it's like a light bulb goes off in people's heads that, oh, you mean that all goes to me? And yes. And, for me, the larger the company gets, the more you're paying for staff, the more you're paying for buildings, and you're paying for all the accoutrements that go along with it. But you, as the little guy, you can put on just as good of a show. And let's say you put on 10 of your multi-day tours a year or whatever. There's avenues online today to market, to connect with new audiences. To Stephanie's point, it behooves the CVBs and the DMOs and some of these organizations and associations to also be specifically promoting these little guys. But then on top of that, I work very closely with one online tour guiding platform. They take a 20% commission, but they've revealed to me that their highest earning guide on that platform earns over $230,000 a year. That was 2019. That was not last year or this year, but $230,000 is, I'm sure all of us here, nothing to sneeze at. But what are they doing? They're selling private tours to clients who are requesting a specifically designed itinerary. They're not just the staff that gets hired to fulfill this 3-hour walking tour, right? In which you're paid $75 for the walking tour, right? You're offering a service that is of a higher level to clients that connect with you on this platform. These opportunities exist, but it's a matter of awareness and education and understanding just how different the industry is than 10 years ago, where your option as a tour guide was to just be hired by a tour operator. Or your option as a tour operator is to look around and say, I can't do what the big guys can. Well, now you can. And I do think it needs to be something at the forefront of this discussion about economic equity, both in general in the industry, but then also specifically the racial injustices that happen as a result of this.
Mm-hmm.
And we also have to remember, we have some very large tour operators that have been around for 20 years, 50 years, 100 years. They didn't start off that way. So if they can do it, then it's just a matter of figuring out, but oftentimes again, it's a pay to play industry, and being able to afford to be at these trade shows, to have your products sold by other operators, and being able to be, members of your DMV and other trade associations where you can sell and market your product. Those things matter, and they do contribute to your company being able to have larger margins and to be able to be around for 20, 50, 100 years. So if they can do it, I know we're going to do it, and we're going to help Black tour operators do that as well.
Great. I have one more thing to bring up, and then we'll open it up to questions. But I just wanted to acknowledge this has probably been a pretty US-centric kind of discussion, and Travel Unity definitely it goes beyond just the US. So certainly there are relevant issues and programs and initiatives that are all going on across the world to address diversity in tour operators. And we don't have time to speak to those right now, but if there's anyone here that can do that, maybe when we go to the questions, we can hear more of those things that are going on. I guess the last part I wanted to address is we've talked a lot about specific experiences that are designed for a community. So a Black cultural heritage tour, for example, what Stephanie has built and designed. One of the other things I just want to raise, and I want to know if you guys have had much experience with this, is what is the place of, or what should tour operators be doing with their regular tours when it comes to DEI? Because certainly the stories of Black Americans and Native Americans intersect with every inch of land we have in this country. So our tours of Washington, D.C., how many tours talk about that city being built largely by slaves, and the history of slavery and things like that. There's been, I think, a pretty widely publicized, at least before the pandemic, issue with plantations in this country. And most plantations, their programming does not come anywhere close to addressing the fact that these were slave camps, and they're focused on pretty houses and the history of the planters themselves. So what is the role in transforming the existing tours that are out there, the average tour, be it of New York City or Paris or LA or wherever it is? What's the role? What should tour operators be doing around this piece?
Well, one of the things I just want to make a correction that I think oftentimes a lot of tour operators, they use the word slaves without recognizing the fact, instead of enslaved Africans, because there's a difference. Our ancestors, my ancestors, they were proud Africans that were enslaved and brought to America. So they weren't born slaves. So that's a distinction that I think operators need to know when they're telling the Black history story, because it does matter if you have Black people on your tour, okay? So starting with cultural sensitivity and understanding who's on your tour, and then making certain, again, if you're not very certain about how you communicate, the messaging you use in marketing Black cultural heritage tours or Black history tours, then consult a local Black historian, So making certain that you're not being insensitive, and you're not even aware that you're being insensitive by how you tell our stories and the language that you use to tell our stories. And also marketing to multicultural audiences, taking a look at your marketing collateral, your website. Is there representation of multicultural audiences participating in your tours? Because if it isn't, then you're missing out on people who may want to take your tour, but feel like that's not for me because there's no representation of me on their tours. So I think those are two key things. If you want to expand your audience and, attract more multicultural audiences, then start by looking at the imagery and the messaging and how you communicate your tours and the information you use on your website to describe your tours and the faces, that are represented, through your marketing collateral on your websites.
This year, we led a book discussion on Clint Smith's book, How the Word is Passed, which I highly recommend for any operators or guides who are just looking at some of the questions at play in terms of what it means to be either a site or an operator or a guide, reckoning with sort of this subject matter, this terrain. It's just a side point, but to sort of complement what Stephanie was saying, don't be afraid to look at your tour. A normal tour doesn't just need to be, I'm a New Yorker, doesn't need to be Times Square, Rockefeller Center, the Plaza Hotel, the New York Public Library, and Grand Central. Look at the wealth and breadth of what you can do to integrate underrepresented vendors, stories. Of course, we go back to storytelling because that's so important, but what is the very kind of material of your tour and what can you do to integrate certainly diverse perspectives, but also make sure the money flows to the right restaurant. I actually had a lot of conversations with the student tour operator this year, trying to help them understand that it's a matter of, I guess, responsibility, but also making a tour more interesting to go beyond the big name restaurants, the Hard Rocks, the Planet Hollywoods, that just so quickly and easily can be booked for 50 people or 30 people. It's much harder to go out, get boots on the ground that you don't find at the conferences. Again, this goes back to they're not showing up at conferences. They're not sponsoring the big booths. They're not sponsoring the come and visit me and we'll throw you a perk and we'll send you to all these Broadway shows. Just send me 5,000 people this year to my, my restaurant. It is much harder to say no to that on a staff level, the person that's going there and doing that, but also on an operational level. It's much harder to have a whole network of restaurants that are truly local, in which you're empowering the local community. But it's a win-win-win for everybody because it's certainly a way to also set yourself apart in terms of the quality and the depth of what you're doing on a tour. So it's storytelling, it's vendor contracting, it's itinerary design, and all of that stuff should be done by every operator because I think it makes for a much more interesting travel industry landscape than what we've had in the past, which is right. Like Stephanie said, it's often pay to play. The biggest names have the biggest booths, have the biggest representation at the places, and make it the easiest also to book them. And so, it's a whole supply chain awareness, I guess, in terms of being that operator on the ground. And then, I'm a big fan of, I call it the Trojan horse approach to itinerary design. I hear a lot of people say, well, our customers don't want that. I say, well, don't tell them, or don't make it, just go there. I used to do a New York City bus tour, and I was told by my operator, don't take them to the Bronx. It's too unsafe. It's too uncertain. It'll scare them. It turns them off. Well, you know what? I would just tell them we're going on a bus tour of New York City, and we'd cross a bridge. They'd be loving the stories. They'd be loving the experience. We'd be sitting down for lunch, and I'd say, oh, by the way, we're in the Bronx, and they're clutching their purses or they're terrified. No, they go, oh, what were we talking about? We were always told this is so awful. This used to happen in neighborhoods all around New York. Now it happens to New York on a whole. People say, can I cross the George Washington Bridge and enter New York City right now? Or will I immediately get shot or get COVID? So, some of this stuff is happening to cities that used to happen to neighborhoods, and gave tour operators an easy excuse to say, well, we're not going to go there. The customer doesn't want to go there. Take them there and show them before you, even tell them what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, all great ideas. Thank you so much for all of that. I do want to open it up to the group for comments and questions. I particularly wanted to invite, I think it's Marinelle. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly. I apologize, to to jump in. I know you are also a tour operator, so maybe you also have some perspectives on this to add.
Yes, hi. Can you guys hear me okay?
Mhm.
Yep.
Okay. I want to just acknowledge that I'm in the land of I'm in Tawantinsuyo, which is Peru. It's the territorial lands, ancestral lands of the Quechua people where I live. I am Filipina by birth. I was born in the Philippines, an immigrant to the United States, became a human rights lawyer, and then 5 years ago, I started a mountain trekking company called Peak Explorations, then now changed to Equity Global Treks. I also have a human rights nonprofit organization, the Porter Voice Collective. I do investigative work in Peru, Nepal, Tanzania about the porter abuse and exploitation on the mountain trails. All I do is hiking. So, so I want to just give you the caveat that if I am going to talk about the industry, my experience is really involved in the hiking in the US, the outdoors. I can totally talk about that, the industry there, or I can talk about the international aspect of mountain trekking and its industry. I have to say the equity issue in tourism is huge. And actually, coming from a human rights perspective, I was really appalled about the level of this isn't just equity. We have human rights crisis in the tourism industry. And, we heard Stephanie talk about the situation with the folks in the US, the people that are underrepresented, different communities and pockets of communities who are entrepreneurs who are trying to get access. When I want to speak about what the global aspect looks like, and unfortunately, I don't have good news, at least in the mountain trekking industry, when it comes to porters. And if people are not familiar with that, these are folks who carry your bags in Kilimanjaro, in Nepal, Himalayas, in the Camino Inca Trail in Peru, in Machu Picchu. These are labor kind of work service. They are the blood of the industry. Without them, there will never be Machu Picchu classic Inca Trail or the treks we love in Himalayas and the Kilimanjaro. But they are the lowest of the low when it comes to the tourism hierarchy. I don't believe sustainability exists in their world. I don't believe equity exists in their world either, because if I want, based on our 6 months investigation for a documentary I'm working in Peru, for example, in the Inca Trail, the 8,000 Quechua porters to this day still stay in toilets at night on the Inca Trail. They sleep in caves. They don't get paid. They don't even have 3 meals a day. They use alcohol to get drunk on trail so they don't feel hunger. These are like real investigations we did in 2019. I believe that if we really want to do DEI the right way in the travel industry, we also need to talk about human rights, labor rights, indigenous rights, because those are all implicated in equity, in the world of tourism equity. And I think one of the things that really is appalling to me as a human rights lawyer coming into the travel industry is to realize that people in the global south, the labor workers, really the porters and the guides, even guides have their own equity issues in Peru, and they're not really treated well either. So I think there has to be sort of acknowledgement that there has to be hard discussions about this, because it's heart-wrenching to see it on the ground. I've been in Peru for 3 years. The Quechua porters are my neighbors and they become my community, and every time I interview them for the film, their heads are they bow down their heads all the time. I think what tourism industry has done for the Inca Trail porters is to leave them with no dignity, no self-respect. This is the tourism industries I discovered for the past 3 years, and no one is talking about this. And this is just a slice. I'm pretty sure when we go to other countries like my country, I'm Filipina in Philippines, people who are working there, the workforce, we haven't talked about the violations, the cheap labor being used, even child labor at times in the tourism industry, sex trafficking. There's so many things that we need to discuss. Equity shouldn't just be performative. It shouldn't be just scratched to the surface. It shouldn't be Western centric or US based, because Americans do go overseas. It connects everyone and everything together. And in fact, if Stephanie's work advances in the tourism industry in America, that's good for people everywhere. And in the same token, I can say the same thing in reverse. If there's negativity happening in US, it's negative also outside the US and vice versa. So I guess I just want to encourage people to be a little bit more candid and really dig deeper, because there's a lot to dig in the industry. And I mean, I'm happy to to share resources. I could send you my email on the websites, but I think these conversations are great, but as a starting point only, but it doesn't really accomplish anything until we get uncomfortable, until we actually look at the human rights aspect of it. I think DEI is not a marketing tool. If you're going to start from a marketing tool business perspective, you're on the wrong path. This is a civil rights, human rights issue, first and foremost. As a Filipina who's been marginalized, this is a human rights issue for me, not my marketing. And even if I don't make money for my company, I have a voice, and that's what I have as my wealth. I will just continue talking, even if I don't have money, because as a person of color, this isn't it. It's personal. If I don't do it, who's gonna do it for me and for us? And for
Yeah.
everyone I see and the porters. It's a burden that I carry. And since I start being an entrepreneur in industry, no association helped me. And TripSchool, that's great. You have that. Actually, I was looking at your offerings and I'm like, I would have loved to have had support. But a lot of the people in this industry, as a Filipina and an immigrant, I was actually discouraged many times to not even do anything. They said you should stick being a lawyer. I think you're going to have a hard time. And they told me don't ever be political because you will not get clients. Luckily, there's a momentum towards that DEI, and I took advantage of it to open up and use my voice. People notice me, but I'm not still not making that much money, but I'm okay with it because to be honest with you, that's more of the priority so I can sleep at night knowing that I'm
Yeah.
actually fighting. So I think we need to have these discussions. Like please consider that when you have conferences because it's not just US, it's everywhere. And the farther you go away from US, you go to global south countries, it's a different ball game. It's a very systemic, colonized, white supremacist system, and it will break your heart to see what stories they would have to tell you. Now we're talking about storytelling, talk about the stories of the porters. It's very heart-wrenching. That's all I have to say.
That's awesome, Marina. Yeah.
Amen. That's all I can say to that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's too many platitudes in life in general, but more to your point, what are we doing with our lives? What are we doing in the travel industry? Are we patting each other on the back? Or more importantly, like you left being a lawyer to enter into this industry. Well, I think we're all in this because of a mission. And so what is our mission? Like, what are we trying to accomplish in this little sliver of the world? And it's such an important sliver because whether it's a hike or a walking tour or a food tour or anything, you're catching people in a moment where they're out of their normal context and you have a chance to change them. I remember my first tour when I was in New York, when I moved to New York, the tour operator said, listen, this is a group from Texas and they're very special, if you know what I mean. I go, okay. Well, turns out what they meant by it was they had opinions about everything and everybody in New York. And it wasn't to ruffle their feathers. I'm a gay man, I have a husband. And they said, don't, and what my boss was telling me was, don't bring up the fact that you're gay or you're going to get into trouble and you're going to give us bad reviews. It's the first thing that I did, of course, because of course, as New Yorkers, we like to disobey rules, but more importantly, this idea that we need to sort of take our identities away and present this bland, platitudinous presentation of a destination no longer works. It no longer works on an ethical level, but it also doesn't work on simply a business level as a provider of this experience. I mean, so for so many years, I was told present the good face of the destination, but now you're right. It's presenting the real face, the authentic face, and the authentic self of who you are, whether you're a gay man or whatever your identity and your inheritance is. That's great.
Absolutely. And I just want to make one last statement. Marinelle, what you said, it's personal. It's very personal. Sustainability and equity is personal. And that's why for everybody in this industry or everybody on this call that has ever met with me one-on-one, you probably said, oh, wow, she's so, I take this work personally because this is a window of opportunity. And if I don't go hard, and if I don't represent the voices of those who don't have a platform or this platform that I have to try to change this industry, which impacts lives, And I'm in a position to help build equity because it does impact people that I represent personal. So it's very personal. Sustainability is very personal because everybody in this industry who wants to be a part of it should be able to sustain their households and their businesses through this industry if they really want to work in it. So it's very personal. And thank you for saying that.
Okay, I think we are at our time here, and there's another session following this. I believe that session will actually provide a forum for continuing these kinds of discussions. I think I just want to sum up a couple of things that coming out of this. One is stories. Who's telling the stories? Don't tell stories that aren't your stories. Meaningful equity, which can't be people earning minimum wage, can't be people just getting, you know, like a tiny percentage of the revenues from their stories. There has to be equity in all aspects of it. And I do want to hop on to the comment from Marinelle at the end, which is really we're operating as tour operators within an industry that is more than any industry almost structured as a colonial white supremacist model. And that's every sector within the travel industry. And the whole industry has to change. And when we talk about real equity, the kinds of changes we're talking about are significant, to say the least, and will make everyone uncomfortable, I think. So, you know, I'm grateful for having been a part of this session because I think that we did speak to the uncomfortable truths that this industry needs to face. So thank you to Mitch, and thank you to Stephanie. Thank you, Marinelle, at the end, and thank you all who joined us today for this session. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.